Welcome back, Poggers, to another very long-awaited episode of the Pog State. I am Atlas, joined by Valdes, Chronicler, and Wolf, and thankfully, everyone is feeling better. First thing that we need to talk about is the fact that everyone except me got COVID, which kind of makes me think that maybe I gave it to everyone and I didn't know that I had it at some point. I'm like really anxious about this. However, I've been tested multiple times and I've never felt sick. So maybe I'm insane. I don't know. How was it dealing with having to be at home and quarantining, boys?
For me, it wasn't that bad, other than, of course, missing the LCK. But my symptoms were relatively fine. You know, just a minor cough, some sore throat, but not too bad. I'm just kind of glad to get it over with, you know?
Yeah.
And to be back working and to not have missed, you know, more LCK at a more important time.
Yeah. I got boomed.
Yeah, you got boomed.
I got boomed real hard. I couldn't even play video games for like 3 days. That's when you know it's bad.
It's a terrible sign.
I was just on the couch, feverish, and not really being able to do anything. And then once that had passed, I coughed my lungs out for like 3 days. So it was not great. Didn't have a good time, but I'm fully revitalized and very happy to be back.
I feel like I got the third generation of it. Like, you had the worst, then Brendan was like a little bit worse, or a little bit less bad, and then mine was the least bad. Like, I barely had symptoms. I had like a sore throat for 2 nights, and it was not that bad for me. But I was down to stay home, make sure nobody else gets it. But it was interesting casting from home. I think this is the better iteration of casting from home because we still had a crowd in Lowell Park. I still had Max, you know, at the studio. Like, it was halfway there, and I still had the crowd mics like fed into my ears, so it was the best casting from home experience I've ever had, honestly, in any esport. So it really wasn't that bad to work from home for me. I'm glad to be back, but I was expecting it to be like, oh God, it's just so terrible to cast from home, but no, not really actually.
And we also had some of our teams struggling with some COVID issues as well. Last week, of course, Kwandong Freaks really sort of struck down. The most hilarious part about it was the fact that Moham did the whole punching the teddy bear of Hoyt, and then immediately afterwards, Moham gets COVID as well and has to stay home. It was like the most immediate smacked in the face with karma ever.
Yeah.
He got mantraed, let's just say that. Obliteration. But it was very, very cute. I think they've probably won the award for dealing with the players at home the best type method. And they also didn't seem to struggle too much as far as the play was concerned, right?
Yeah, I think it's been really nice that we have this new rule where the players can play from home if they're feeling able. At first, you know, when it was announced, like last season rather, when we had some of the emergency stuff, I was like, yeah, but I just think this is still correct. You know, I don't think we should have players half online, half in the studio. But now that it's actually worked out in practice, like the players seem to be playing just fine from home, and the teams haven't had a huge performance dip, or really even a performance dip that's noticeable at all, even when Def was playing at home and stuff like that. So it seems like the new rule is definitely the right choice, and I think it's pretty cool that like now we will never have the disaster that was last season ever again.
Yeah, I think that especially with like another umpteenth wave coming through, it's good to see that the protocol actually works, and that we just get to keep playing the games. And even though I love my challenger call-ups, it was not a great spring altogether, and seems to be working out very nicely.
Definitely is. All right, let's get into some news that has been released. Of course, not really very surprising, but something that we would definitely like to talk about, which is the LCK once again has 4 seeds heading into the World Championship.
Nice.
And I think that this is the perfect episode to discuss who we think our frontrunners are at this stage, because it's been a few weeks since we've really got the lay of the land of the LCK, and I think it's now time to talk about where our power rankings are. We need to do our very best to avoid certain things, such as talking about KT too positively.
Don't worry, I got you covered.
Yeah,
I'm prepared.
I was struggling with that yesterday.
Not talk well about KT because Live Sandbox are going to Worlds.
I mean, that's true, but Dom1 going to Worlds. DRX going to Worlds, you know? I think Sandbox, that's a shoo-in, but it's about that 4th seed, you know?
Yeah, we're not even discussing 1 and 2 because
that doesn't exist.
most obvious one would be T1 winning and Gen.G being a runner-up, because Gen.G and T1 are clearly still in a league of their own, and Gen.G doesn't really win playoffs or win against T1 since, what was the last time? Spring 2021? When they got the huge upset and then obviously still lost to Damwon. But it actually does get really interesting because with DRX still being, I think, an inconsistent team, but having an upswing, and then Liv Sandbox being the way they are, and then Damwon Kia getting beaten by DRX, and even in some of their wins, like individually, Canyon in particular looks quite shaky. Dr. McKellen have been very up or down. It actually becomes very interesting. I kind of have a hard time predicting who's actually going to end up as our 3rd and 4th seed.
At this moment in time, Damwon, like at the time of this recording, and obviously for several more weeks because it's not going to be decided until playoffs hit, but Damwon Kia has 50 points. Kwangdong has 30, DRX has 20. So in order for Damwon to not make it, it's extremely unlikely because they would have to get like less. They'd have to get 5th or less basically to then get 70 points, and then Kwangdong would have to pass them. Like, Damwon Kia, to even have to play in the gauntlet, like, because they have 50 points, it's just extremely unlikely. So I know it's fun to talk about Damwon as kind of like, okay, they're not doing as hot as we expect.
I mean, they're definitely playing in the gauntlet.
They're playing in the gauntlet, yeah.
They have to, because
that's definitely
T1 and Gen.G are getting in.
Sorry. So they will have to play in the gauntlet, but
Yeah.
because they will have the higher seed, it's very unlikely they will not go at all. They would just not be the 3rd seed necessarily.
Because now with 4 seeds, just like last year, the finals of the gauntlet, both teams go.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Because Hamalife, they beat Nongshim in the 2nd to last round of the gauntlet. And then they played in the final match, and they lost their 3-2, but they went to Worlds anyway, even though they did not win the gauntlet, and they got 2nd in the gauntlet. So, like Wolf was saying, I think there's a really high chance that Damwon, unless they totally botch Summer, they should probably be in that final match, and
they'll qualify either way.
they'll qualify. I mean, I'd still say they're 3rd best at this point.
Yeah.
Even though, DRX.
I
think Damwon, a little bit inconsistent this year as well, with the addition of Nuguri, and I think they're still 3rd on paper in my mind.
Very short interjection. The fact that T1 only beat Hanwha Life by 1 game is something that I'd forgotten, and that's like, especially in the light of what happened to that T1 roster afterwards, in which they were 1 game away from World Finals and then went on to have the best LCK split of all time. It's pretty funny.
And the reason why we didn't have 4 teams potentially we couldn't have had 4 teams in the top 4 of Worlds is because they rematched in the round of 8, where OnLife Esports was defeated by a Korean team, and of course didn't even have a chance to compete against EDG because of how the bracket went. So, yeah, we could have had. We
had a lot of shots. We had a lot of chances at EDG, though. Let's be honest.
We really did.
We took them to the limit. We took them to the limit every single time, and it was not quite enough. But we just don't have enough depth here in the LCK. 4 teams through to the round of 8 and 3 teams through to semifinals is not enough. I think if we're actually going to win Worlds, we need 4 out of 4 in the semifinals. Because if we get 4 out of 4 in the semifinals, I think it's going to be really difficult for the LCK not to win Worlds.
Yeah.
So for both Liv Sandbox and KT, they need to outperform DRX and Kwangdong basically in playoffs, assuming they make it there, if they want to have a shot in the gauntlet. Because both of those teams currently have no points, and Kwangdong is sitting on 30. Because they made playoffs, they ended up getting 30 points there. They got the top 4 from Spring, so they are in a position to actually maybe take one of those spots away from DRX or KT or Liv Sandbox, because only, I think, we have, 6 teams? How many teams go to Gauntlet, actually?
4.
4,
so,
right? Yeah,
I got it here.
So we have,
it's
6
only
teams
4.
in the running for that, but, only 4 will actually be in the gauntlet itself.
Well, yeah, it's actually, so it's pretty much the top 6, right? So it's kind of like how playoffs works, but the top 6 is based on how many points you've got, right? So if somehow, in some crazy way, Damwon misses playoffs for summer, they will still be in the Worlds Gauntlet.
Yeah.
Assuming You know, not every
Unless
other
like
team.
KT wins LCK
Yeah,
and then
right.
like
There'll be some like weird situations where if it's not T1 and Gen G in the LCK Summer Finals, then that's when things get really shaken up. But because so many of the points are on T1 and Gen G, Dalmonkey are basically confirmed. Unless they do something crazy and like win the LCK, and then it's like it's the opposite sort of conversation.
Yeah, what's really interesting, as Wolf has mentioned, is I don't actually know. I assume summer points take precedence over if it's a tie in terms of
Yeah,
points.
summer points take precedence if it's a tie.
It seems pretty likely that both Kwangdong and Fred Abrien is basically given at this point. They're not getting any points, and I think it's fairly likely that Kwangdong also are not getting any points. So then we're gonna have Dalmonkey and DRX seem kind of a no-brainer to have in the gauntlet no matter what, and then
it's KT Live
then
Sandbox.
it's KT Sandbox, right? And then you get a gauntlet where I agree. I think Dalmonkey most likely will end up with the most points, so they'll be kind of in a pretty good position. But between DRX, KT, and Sandbox, I have no idea. I want Sandbox to go because I love that team.
But if Kwangdong, they have 30 points from spring, and then you have, let's say, KT or Live Sandbox, if they get 6th in summer, they
Wouldn't
only
be
have 10
enough.
points.
yeah, so then KT still wouldn't have a chance.
Yeah, whoever gets 10 points would not make it, and Kwangdong would make it instead.
Yeah.
So Kwangdong would make it to the gauntlet, actually,
Yeah, so that's the
with
thing.
their 30
Yeah,
points.
that's a good point.
So if
So-
Kwangdong don't make it to if Kwangdong don't make it to playoffs and they're only sitting at 30 points, just getting playoffs alone isn't enough for KT or Live Sandbox
Yeah.
to beat them. They
Whoever
will have to
gets
do
sixth.
well in playoffs.
No, they need, because the summer points you get different amounts, right? So you get the 30 points that Kwangdong has. Assuming
fifth.
Kwangdong isn't
That's
going to
fifth,
get there, you
yeah.
only need to get 5th. So you don't need to like
But whoever gets
get
6th,
past the first round, for
yeah,
example.
exactly.
But if KT Rolster or Live Sandbox, saying they make it to playoffs this year or this season, if they get 6th, then they won't have more than
Correct.
Kwangdong.
Oh, no, yeah,
Kwangdong-
they're screwed. Yeah,
so
yeah.
then Kwangdong make it.
So they have
and
to perform
KT
well.
or Live Sandbox don't.
And
Yeah.
let's not forget, like that's what happened last time as well. Was actually that it was Hanwha that only got points in spring and then won the gauntlet. Well, effectively they didn't win, but like I think they won the gauntlet.
In my heart, they won the gauntlet.
Even they did,
Yeah.
they didn't win it, right? So that's actually really interesting. Like we could have a timeline where DRX just have an off day. And then Live Sandbox do the Live Sandbox thing and don't actually pull through, and then somehow Kwangdong ends up going to Worlds. Like it's not even that unlikely.
I mean, it is just it's a bit insane.
It's gonna make me lose sleep now that I
Now that
realize
you
this
know
is
that
a-
that's possible.
possibility. Because right now that is not one of the team of the teams that we are discussing. Like that is not the one I personally would at this
So-
moment in time like to send.
Yeah, so we let's say that Dalmonkey
Oh, we'll send them
does
to the
go.
first round of the qualifier, Wolf.
Yeah.
Don't worry, they're not getting much further than that.
So let's say that I think Dalmonkey, we can all, as Valdes pointed out, like is most likely to be our at the very least they'll go. If it'd be third or fourth, we can kind of debate,
Yeah.
but they'll go. So between KT, Live Sandbox, and DRX, like who do we feel has the best shot? Because I think that's actually a really interesting question.
So if you asked me this question at the beginning of 2 days ago, I'd be like, oh, it's Live Sandbox and DRX are terrible and Dom1 are definitely going. They're just looking better and better. But then like DRX kind of like schooled Dom1, and we had in the post-match interview talking to Pioshik was actually really kind of eye-opening. Him talking about the fact that his coaching staff have given him time to rest. He hasn't been dealing with as much of the ridiculous amounts of pressure because they figured out how to sort of mitigate that. And that sort of like even just that interview, yes, they managed to beat Dalmonkey. That's probably the main reason why we should be like standing up and recognizing DRX. But the fact that it's Pioshik that's found a way to rejig how he thinks about the game and how good he looked on the Lee Sin as well, like I'm starting to feel like the DRX hype train's about to leave the station again. So I'm now really confused. I don't even know. Like, is Dalmonkey even going to make it to playoffs, man? Like,
We always repeat our past mistakes. Just as I get excited for Live Sandbox, Max gets excited for a team with depth. And last time they did make it to World, so yeah,
yeah, it worked out. It worked out. So you know,
yeah. Obviously, for me, it's Sandbox. Even though I don't want to publicly admit that I believe I do, and I really want him to make it. I want to see Croco go to play-ins because I think it'd be something that we all need. You know, it's been a rough year. COVID's like still not gone. I just need Croco to go to play-ins and Prince to Zeri on some people, and that would make me very happy.
So until we had that KT Nongshim match that was played yesterday from the time that we're recording, I felt like KT was more consistent than both Live Sandbox and DRX, but for a long time I was thinking, like, I want Live Sandbox to be our 4th seed. I think they have the most potential depth. I think that, personally, I'd rather see new and young players actually get a chance at Worlds instead of Deft. Like, I know it's his last year, and everybody wants to see him get one more run through Worlds. I'm like, yeah, but he had a lot of chances, right? I'd rather see some new blood. I want to see, like, I want to showcase to the world, literally at the World Championship, like, what else we have. That was kind of my personal feeling, but I've kind of changed my opinion after watching how KT and Live Sandbox have operated and how reliant they are. It's basically like, are we sending Live Sandbox and KT to Worlds, or are we sending Prince and Aiming to Worlds? Like, the rest of the team has been extremely inconsistent, and their play style and draft style is so extremely one-dimensional that DRX has shown us a lot more depth. They can play strong side bottom, like with a Callista. They can play scaling draft. They can play a tempo draft. Like, we've seen so many different ways to DRX have approached the game in so many different ways. Whereas KT and Sandbox are like, cool, 80 carry meta. We got the 80 carry. Like, we're gonna do it. We don't know what the meta's gonna look like at Worlds. So thinking about it more, like right now, I'm kind of feeling like, for the LCK and the sake of like what we appear as a region, I'm like, I think DRX is the most versatile team we could send. So I'm kind of hoping they pull through.
Sending DRX before Wolf, and it did not go well. Just so you know, that team had Chovy and Keria on it.
I know,
and it still didn't go well.
I can't believe you would do Dove like that, man. Completely ignoring the best weak side top laner in the LCK.
But also,
the king of role players, Dove.
My favorite thing is that you're talking about like Live Sandbox being one-dimensional. That's their shtick. That's how they win. Actually, they haven't changed their like playstyle
2.5 years
ever since they like qualified to the LCK, and it's only now starting to work. Like, it's just hilarious that they use. There's no surprise. They don't come at you from an angle and they're like, oh, no one's figured out how to deal with this Live Sandbox. No, they will just take every single fight and we'll just see how it turns out. And it turns out they're just like getting better at all being on the same page when they do it. It's like watching like a steamroller or a steamboat, if you will, just gather momentum. And they're now just starting to go too fast, you know?
So if I can give my thoughts, I think that... to be honest, I think, you know, like we can say, oh, Live Sandbox is just Prince and KT is just Aiming. I think especially for KT, like, that is true. I think after yesterday and how they struggled with Nongshim, like, in my mind, KT is a very solid third place out of these three teams. But it's very difficult for me to say between DRX and Live Sandbox right now. I think that Prince and his performance against Gen G and, like, how angry he looks, how determined and passionate he is, and the fact that I think that Closer and Croco have actually been looking better. I think Dove, you know, trying his best, you know, trying to move away from that weak side top, trying to not just play Gragas every game was, you know, not necessarily successful against Doran the other day on Gen G.
If Gimgoon can win Worlds, so can Dove.
He tried his best, but it was a fail. I still think, though, that Croco and Prince might just be good enough to push them over the line. And Closer has been looking better and better as well. So, in my mind, you know, DRX were having a lot of success, and somehow they caught Damwon Kia off guard, just like Kwangdong caught T1 off guard. But at the same time, I don't... That's not enough for me to say, like, oh, DRX should be number one out of this list. I think that Live Sandbox with Croco and Prince, you know, I don't have the same kind of anti-bias that that Mao is trying to have with Live Sandbox. I just think, actually, they might be number one in my mind out of these three.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think Prince is good enough, to be honest.
It's hard for me because... for a long time, I thought DRX's playstyle was too stagnant. Like, they're like, oh, we're just going to put Def on Callista every game, and then we're going to put Zeka on a scaling mid, whether it's Corki or Azir. It's one of those two champions. And then occasionally when he doesn't get it, he's like, oh, I'll play a Kali, and I hope this works. But I feel like DRX have really figured out, like, how to change their drafts and move away from Deft playing just hard on the bottom side. Like, he can play Scaling Champions. He was very famous for playing Scaling Champions across his career. He's doing it again. When he played Jinx the other day, I was kind of concerned, like, ooh, like this could be one of those games where, like, Def just doesn't pop off, like he falls behind. It's very rare for him on the Jinx, but not because it was Jinx, because, like, okay, slower paced game for him. He hasn't been playing that style this season. And then he just completely popped off. He did everything he needed to do. We were like, oh yeah, that's right. It is Def's Jinx. Like, for me, like, I'm leaning towards him just because I think Pyosik has found his form again after taking that break, and all three of these teams, like KT, Sandbox, and DRX, like, the second you think, oh, there's hope, like, they always take it away from you. Like, they always crush you. So I'm saying this carefully, but right now I like to say I'm very optimistic about DRX's chances.
I think in the way that Chronicler is getting excited about Liv Sandbox, even though he's trying desperately not to. We've been burned by Pyosik before, and to be honest, I don't know. Like, taking a short break and having a good series against Stalman, I don't think is enough for me to believe. I need more. I need more Pyosik. I think Kingen, he looked great in the beginning of the season where he could play Ornn when it was meta, but now it's like like silence. I don't know, like, where has he been? You know?
I'd actually argue, and maybe this is good because I know we're gonna throw some spice. I actually think that the only actually truly exceptional part of DRX right now is Zeka, and I think the rest of that team is looking. On some days, I think they look incredible.
Hey, Barrel's got some good shot calling.
I was gonna say, like, I'm on the Barrel hype train a little bit as well.
I love Barrel shot calling, but again, this is also coming. Like, we've also seen again that I think DRX consistently overperform when they play against Dalmon, because when Barrel says in an interview,
not consistently. Over the past couple of series,
well, the last
they've consistently tanked every single match.
Recently, for this year, right, or for this split, right?
Yeah,
like, I think that
split.
when Barrel says in interviews, I stayed up to 4 a.m. because I wanted the draft that beat Dalmon, and they beat Dalmon. I think that's good, but the only truly consistent player that has looked good, I think, the entire split is Zeka. And I actually would agree with Valdes that even though there's still some Croco moments, overall, weirdly enough, Liv Sandbox actually is really consistent this split. Like, especially when I see their game that they had against Gen G.
I mean, I think they're consistent to a fault. Yeah, they will do the same thing every single game, and sometimes it works. Most of the time it works this season, and sometimes it doesn't. But they will Liv Sandbox you.
Yeah.
Reliably.
And I think it's really good to have a team like that in the LCK, because a lot of LPL teams play a lot more with that mindset, and it catches us off guard pretty often. Of course, the execution on those teams is a lot higher, but
Liv Sandbox, if Liv Sandbox goes to Worlds, it would be like the team you do not want to have in your group. You just do not want to have that team in your group.
They are the even, like, doesn't matter, like, unless you're a wild card, because then Croco just runs in level 2, dies, and then you just win the game. Like, but I can also see him
I
take
feel like
on
if you're a wild card team, you're just going to do it worse than Liv Sandbox. Liv Sandbox beats you in the mirror of the chaos, and then if you're just trying to play a standard straight up game, then, like, Liv Sandbox just, they become a trap game. If you try to prepare too much for them, it ruins your group.
Do you know what I would see happening in that sort of matchup? I would see Liv Sandbox, like, invading into an enemy that has Braum, like, losing 3 people to nothing, but then Croco still ganks bot lane level 2, and they still get a double kill, and they still win the game. Like, that's how it, that's, like, the kind of, like, full lizard brain that they would be going with.
They are the lizard brain team. Like, and I think in
crocodile brain. Be it on the top side of the map or in the jungle, you know.
But DRX versus Sandbox is really fun, and I can't wait to see who actually ends up being the better one of those two teams.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm kind of with Wolf here, because I can't help it to feel a little bit better about DRX after taking down Damwon Kia. We haven't necessarily seen Liv Sandbox find, like, the last time we saw them sitting here right now was getting smashed by Gen G, like everybody else who plays against Gen G.
They got smashed pretty well.
Although game 1 was very close.
They did lose by less than a lot.
Yeah.
That is true.
It was an improvement from the last time they got
Nexus.
smashed.
Yeah, it was like the best game of the season.
That's true. It was actually. It was probably the most fun game of the season. Yeah. It was a weird dichotomy that day, because we had not only the most fun, most exciting game, but also the least fun, least exciting game. It was a roller roller coaster of emotions. It absolutely was.
By the way, Live Sandbox versus DRX match 67.
That is actually
coming soon to an LCK near you.
So I'm
week.
so torn because we have to do our suggestions for match of the week, and there's a telecom war where both KT and T1 just dropped games to teams that should be way worse than them, and so it's like, oh, who's gonna stumble the most? Question mark. It's gonna be KT, but still an exciting telecom war, to be perfectly honest. Then there's DRX versus Live Sandbox, which I think is like kind of actually the match of the week. And then there's
What's the
like
other one,
Gen G
Max?
versus T1, but like,
but
but honestly,
that one's pretty good.
yeah, and it's a good match.
It's
a
not
good
great,
match,
it's
but it
okay.
means literally nothing for the standings.
Yeah.
It means nothing at all.
I love.
What do you mean? Gen G could win and take first.
Well, I mean,
have
I think what
first.
Max is saying is...
Well, they could secure first.
They've secured first. They're 3 points ahead.
No, but no. I know what
No?
Valdes means.
So if they lose,
That was spring.
no. Right now they're 3 points ahead.
No, they're.
After they win their next match, they're at least 3 points ahead.
against Hanwha Life.
I'm just saying nothing is set in stone, and that could be the decider.
Okay,
Valdes-
for me, it's
yeah.
like, all right, we're gonna see this match a third time in the finals. So like, I'm not that excited about it. I mean, it's
Yeah,
very
I mean,
exciting,
that's-
but it's
that's like
I think that's
basically
what
my
Max is
point.
basically
Yeah,
what
yeah,
he's
yeah.
saying is like,
And yeah, T1
sure,
will be
yeah.
first because they'll be one match score ahead theoretically if they manage to beat
if they
KT.
win, yeah.
we have two very clear number 1 and number 2 teams, and like we don't know which one is number 1 yet, but like that's what the finals is for. Like regular season,
Yeah.
it's like So for me, like when you're choosing match of the week, like you kind of just want to be like, I don't want to pick that one again. Like we've already
that's what
like,
I'm feeling.
overhyped this. Like I get
I
where
feel
Max is coming
personally
from.
attacked as someone who picked that as match of the week.
Yeah. Well,
Just saying, because it's just a great best of 3. Even though it doesn't mean much.
oh man, I want to do it, but I can't do it to Cubby. Not right here.
We'll have lots of opportunities for that.
It was
okay?
too easy. That particular window was too easy, and I'm not going to take it. If you guys don't have context, that's okay. You don't need it. But yeah, I think that like next week or the week that you guys are about to be watching is going to be so much fun, and I think that
I can't
I'm starting to feel like maybe if you guys see I guess if you saw on Sunday that there was an underline on the DRX Live Sandbox series, then you'll know that I've flip-flopped.
I actually, I love that more than T1 KT.
I do now
Actually,
because like
now that we've given it some thought.
Yeah, if like KT had have smashed Nongshim and it wasn't even close,
And Bro T1 was.
and Bro
actually
T1 was
close.
really shaky, like.
No, shaky's better than close.
Yeah,
wasn't
I think
close.
it was shaky. So that would have been like, can KT take advantage? But then like, BDD got a pentakill in game 2, so like, I don't know.
Hey, Vikla played really well in that third game.
Yeah, he did. He did
Finally figured it
he
out.
In
figured
that
it
third
out.
game, third time's the charm, baby.
Yeah, it was not.
He did
my
get
favorite
Silas
Dickless
3 games in a
series.
row.
He
Yeah.
did get Silas 3 games in a row.
Well, he got
But he
back
made
to
it look like
Which is
not
not-
strong.
Vikla's main skill is making Silas look balanced and still winning. That's what he does.
He
That's
just
what he
really
does.
doesn't want it to get nerfed.
His
doing a good
laning
job,
phase
yeah.
is not the best.
I mean, BDD is also.
I love him
BDD
though.
lanes
He's a
really
great
well. He's
player, but
Great addition.
he certainly does have some
needs
iffy
time.
maneuvers. All right, so I think I'd like to just take a moment because we have mentioned the match of the week or Valdez's match of the week, which I think is going to be match of the week, right? Gen G versus T1 is definitely it. I've already sort of said that I don't think it's that interesting as far as what it means for the state of playoffs. But having the conversation based on what it means as far as the power level of both of these teams, I think is a very fun discussion. Like, putting this in the context of, like, T1 lost to Kwandong, right? They've been pushed by a lot of our lower teams, but they managed to beat Gen G. They were the only team that were capable of beating Gen G. Do we see this as being, like, a kryptonite thing? Are we, like, going back to Samsung White, Samsung Blue, right? Where blue just beats everyone, but they can't beat white. Mm-hmm. Like, is that just the thing that's going to happen? Because, I mean, white ended up winning worlds.
It's like, because we're going to have to do our predictions as well. And last time around, the circumstances for this match were exactly the same, where Gen G just looks better. T1 is fairly shaky against a lot of weaker opponents. So I was like, oh, Gen G's going to win. And then T1 just unleashes like 5 extra levels of anime power, and then they just still stomp them. So
Yeah, and then everybody tweets at us like, I can't believe you guys said that Genji was favored when literally every analyst predicted Genji. Like, it's really dishonest.
And then everyone who predicts that Genji's going to win is actually a hater, and everyone just hates everyone because of prediction that wasn't accurate. Like, oh my god.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know, guys. T1 looking pretty overhyped.
Oh my god. Did you hear the hater next to me? That was so much hate. Unbridled. Wielded in my direction.
There's too many levels of
It's
call
me,
out, guys.
Munchables, on the Pog State.
Hey, don't dig on Munch. I think
he
I don't
says silly things.
Sorry.
I don't
sometimes.
always agree with his take, but he's a sweetheart.
And
he's
he
very
also
passionate.
his one about the the LCS players and then naming a whole bunch of Koreans. That was hilarious.
You can't only have bangers. You
It
know,
was
like
I know, and
he has a
honestly, you
lot.
have to try and give it a crack. You have
Yeah.
to give it a crack if you're gonna actually have one land. You know, you miss every hook you don't throw. You know, he's the blitzcrank of Twitter. And sometimes he's hit some good hooks.
I think that, and I said this on broadcast yesterday in that T1 series, which I was very commonly misquoted, but I do think that T1's mistakes that we saw in the Fred Brion series are very easily fixable mistakes. Overextensions, owner trying to be a god when they were not in a position where they could actually just like run it down as Lee Sin and still win the fight, because that's been most of his Lee Sin games all season long. And I saw a lot of comments like basically despite owner's best efforts, T1 still won. Those are the kind of games where owner just had an off game. He was playing with like kind of the wrong mentality based on the game state and stuff like this. Like, it's just an off day against Fred Brion. Like, we have to remember that Fred Brion, even at the bottom of the standings right now or close to the bottom of the standings, is still an LCK team with really strong players. So I don't want to be too down on T1 after that shaky series, as it was put, because I think, yeah, Genji has been more consistent, but T1 plays the level of their opponents. They prepare really well, and I think it is going to be a very close series. It's very difficult to predict.
Yeah.
And, like, I want to lean towards T1, actually, in this series because they won last time. Like, even in the same circumstance, we're like, oh, Genji looks a little bit more consistent, but I'm like,
context
I don't know.
hasn't changed.
Yeah, the context doesn't change. And, like, T1 often has Genji's number in these really important series, as we've seen over the years. So
It's so tough because I do think that T1's mistakes are the same as they were at the start of the year, and that's the one thing that worries me because it was also something that plagued them during MSI. So I don't actually think that they'll be that easily fixed against Genji, but I think they'll still win, if that makes sense. I think this roster of T1, like their strength and their weakness very clearly is that they're just very willing to throw down, but like Faker going back in after Guma gets caught, or like the team always committing so heavily to skirmishes they probably shouldn't take. I don't know if Genji can punish it, but we've already seen that like internationally they need to get rid of it. Like I'm probably predicting T1, but it's still, I want that part of T1 to be toned down because it is like something that it's still there, and it was a problem at MSI, and it still is a problem now against teams like Brion.
The thing is that no team is perfect, including RNG, who won MSI, right? Like,
yeah, of course.
T1 had issues at MSI, but they also still went to Game 5 of the finals, right? And they are still the best team, I think, in the LCK. The LCK is it's a long split, you know, every split. Like, every team has talked about how it's difficult. It's very grueling. Every week you come out, you play two incredibly strong teams. Like Wolf was saying, you know, it's the LCK, right? And you have to prepare for that, and you have to go through 9 weeks, and then you have to do playoffs and then finals. So, like, if T1 are not feeling it one day, you know, that makes sense because you're not going to be perfect every single day. And, you know, Genji have had a little bit, I think they're having a little bit more fun, you know, in, like, this week-to-week grind of, like, coming up, stomping lower teams and just making it through. But at the end of the day, I think T1 will have the best of 5 number of Genji yet again, and they are still the best team. Genji, I think they might put up a bigger fight this time. Maybe we go to 5 games, but I would still say T1 absolutely.
I mean, in the finals.
Yeah, in the finals, because it's going to be those two.
I really like that take. Just a short point as well. Like, we see, it's easy to forget when we have players that are performing really poorly in the context of the LCK, but like Jonghoon, who was a Challengers reject, goes to a team and is one of the better parts of that team. We have Vital going to the
do your
LGL.
favorite one. Do the
we got
Vital one. Yeah.
Vital going to the LGL and just being undefeated in like the league.
Can
right?
I do one?
Yeah, hit me.
We have Malrang going to the LEC and bopping everyone.
All he had to do, all Malrang had to do was change his
carry.
All he had to do was change his name to Malrang over there, and suddenly, all he needed was the casters to say his name wrong, and then bam.
one of our sub 80 carries in the LCK behind Showmaker. To go to the LEC and then just begin to stomp everyone. Yeah.
And this is not a dig towards other regions, but I've been very outspoken that I still think that when it comes to individual talent, the LCK is still by a large margin the best region in the world. So, I
wouldn't say large margin. Like Knight exists. That guy's pretty good individual talent.
Yeah, I mean, okay, maybe in terms of export.
Yeah.
Not in terms of because
no one gets exported out of the LPL, and so therefore that region doesn't count. So I guess
Hey, what about? I mean, there were some TSM deals.
Yeah, but
that was Sword. He's not an LPL player.
No, you definitely. I don't mean in terms of like what you mentioned. It's just in terms of export, but
I mean, I guess the entirety of LMQ back in the day was just Chinese team.
You know
that
North
America.
No one watching this knows who LMQ.
Oh, surely no Xiao Wei Zhao. Loved that guy. His Yasuo was great.
They're not gonna know Atlas.
Okay, Atlas, let's get you to bed.
Oh, feels bad. But yes, no, I see what you're saying, and I agree. This the whole conversation about like because this is where like all of the hot takes and all of the like people like getting all of the hopium and all that sort of stuff starts happening. It's one of the reasons why Worlds, like when the hype starts happening, it is so exciting and so intoxicating, is because in the context of your region, the team that's winning they look awesome because they're winning in the context of your region. And the League of Legends doesn't look all that different because like when you're at the very top end, you're talking about like milliseconds of like very small amounts of time of different reaction speeds and different like decisions being made and things like this. It's not like he built X item and therefore this player is better. It's this guy's hands work gooder and so you're dead and he has this item but at least he's alive, you know? Like all of those things, like you can look at it on paper. Often it doesn't matter. That's why like I love the RNG point because RNG, they play the same. They don't
every year.
I actually I was watching it was a podcast, I don't know, but anyway, I Will Dominate was talking about the value of repetition and practice of a specific style, and once you get to the highest level, and this resonated with me a lot, once you get to a certain level, it doesn't mean that you can just park this playstyle and you can always do it. It's not like riding a bike, which is the reference that he used, or that I think Thorin used on the show. But it's not like that. You need to go back and you need to practice it. You need to actually get these things out and actually play those styles. And so like I think that like T1 is an example of that, right? Because they play like they're almost stubborn in a lot of these compositions that they'll just keep running back over and over again. And if they don't have to change it, like they want to get the stage experience on Gumayusi's Draven, so they will just perpetually keep picking it. Like they just want to like, and I think that that's like really, really valuable.
So what you're saying is Sandbox wins.
I think Sandbox wins Worlds in 2022, yeah, or 2023.
I think for me, like, I break this matchup down if we have to go into like, you know, we did a lot of like feeling talk until Atlas got into like the real stuff right there for a second, but we did a lot of like, I don't know, like T1 won last time, so we're kind of leaning that way. For me, it goes like almost simpler than that when we break down each individual player. Like, I think Ruler and Lehens are a much stronger bottom 2v2 than Guma Carrier right now. And then we look at the jungle, it's like, damn, like, these are the best two players on these teams right now, I think, at the highest when they play. Like, Peanut and Owner both are so critical for how both of these teams play right now. And then you look at the top side of the map, and you're like, ooh, it's definitely Zeus. It's not Doran. You look at the mid lane, and you're like, okay, it's definitely Chovy. But I think Zayas has been more impactful. I think like Faker's playing a little bit more utility, so Chovy being better right now isn't as valuable. And Peanut's jungle pool is quite wide, like larger than what we have mostly seen from Owner. He randomly played Nocturne. That wasn't what the game was about. I think that like those are the matchups we have to really think about. I think some of the weaknesses of T1 are so small, like Faker and the bottom 2v2, like those are the main like tiny weaknesses. They're so small in the grand context of things because Zayas has been at his highest and at Owner's highest, like much more impactful. And I would even say Owner, I think his highest has been much more impactful than Peanut. Even though Peanut made like the cool, flashy looking plays, Owner's been so damn consistent that like I don't know if it necessarily matters. And when I really like boil it down to like boil it so hard I can like see the salt at the bottom of the pot, like I feel like man, T1's got like a 5% edge here that might just be enough to win the series.
I think Gen G actually looks better individually in the entire bottom half of the map, but I don't think it's going to matter at all.
Yeah. But
if I can jump on the Peanut thing, I think he looks really flashy, like Wolf put it, because he, every single game, does a very predictable style, which is either I'm going to boom the enemy jungler, or I'm going to dive bot 7 times.
Yeah.
Like, he does the same 2 things every single time, and I think that part of the reason why T1 were able to win the last series is because they knew that. And then it was like, oh, Peanut just doesn't get to get massive leads for their insane laners every single time.
We've seen so many bot holders.
Oh, wow. I guess we win.
Like, the meta already is adapting.
Yeah.
Like, junglers will just sit bot behind their turret for 2 minutes, not 2 minutes, but like for 30 seconds pretty easily, just waiting for counter gank.
There's a lot of mind games going on down there in the tri lane as well.
Like the Dom 1 game 1.5 where Canyon had like his best game of the split that now doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Which is very sad, but something that we're not going to discuss on today's podcast. Otherwise, we'll need... Like, we forgot the clown suits. That was the problem.
I actually have someone in my Discord made a wonderful picture of me as a clown, and I can ask if he can get the same outfit for you.
Yeah, we could probably repost it. Maybe Ian can just put that one up on the screen.
I'll send it to him.
Because we did discuss it. So apologies. Clown suits abound. Anyway, I was going to say something. Yes. So the top lane matchup. Does it get more exciting with the fact that Birthday Buff Doran had like an absolutely amazing game?
It gets more exciting.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the peak of these two players, I don't think.
No, I think Doran is one of our most improved players, and it's kind of under the radar because he's on Gen G. But like he was a very clear weak point at the beginning, and last time these two met, I actually thought that was like the start of the turning point where like Zeus is better because Zeus I think is the best player in the LCK, but like I think Doran wasn't a liability at all. They didn't win lane, but who cares? Don't need to win lane.
I think he is doing better, but I also think he's kind of being swept with the wave that is Gen G.
True.
I think that when they play other teams, lower or otherwise, he's just kind of there, not losing, and because top doesn't really matter, a lot of his weaknesses are not exploited, and... You know, like in the past, Doran used to be very tiltable. Like, you would go up, you would dive, you would gank, right? That just doesn't really happen that often nowadays. And so he's just kind of like, with the rest of his amazing team, just kind of being pushed along, kind of in the way that Pioshik was with old DRX, with Chovy and Keria. So I'm worried. I'm worried for him, you know, even though he is looking better. I think that Zeus is the most consistent player by far. Like, he almost was pulling T1 by the coattails through that last series that we saw them against Guangdong Freaks. So I think that is going to be a huge winning point, you know, not just a small one. I think Zeus is like miles ahead of Doran right now.
Zeus is also not an emotional player like Doran is.
Not
like
at all.
Doran,
that's
Doran
one of the
loses game
worries.
1 where he like died twice in lane, and then he's extremely tilted, and you could just see the way he's playing. And then the second game he like tries to, it's almost like he's trying to prove something, and then like fails, and then gets even more frustrated. Zeus, he's not a selfish player. He doesn't play like that. Like, he loses game 1. You can see he's had his frustrating moments on camera where he's like shaking his head like this or going like this after a game. But like, generally speaking, you don't feel that same emotion when you watch game 2 after he won a game 1, but it didn't feel like his performance was good. Doran, you can really both see it on his face and actually witness it in a best of 3, which I think it hurt them in longer series too, going into best of 5s later on.
I think that has improved. I think that Doran has been able to take a bit more control of his emotions, like Valdes said about after the other series against T1. I think even though there have been ups and downs, I think he's looked overall like he's been able to handle it a bit better. And on the other side, like just to pull it back a little bit closer, I still think that this is T1 favored. I don't like, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. Sorry, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? I think that T1's going to win, but I do think that the bottom lane is now more skewed in Genji's favor when the top lane is more skewed in T1's favor. I think it's like we've moved sort of like this a little bit.
Yeah, my point was that like I think that's 100% true, but I feel like the amount of skewed the top lane is really significant for T1.
Yeah.
Whereas the amount of skewed the bottom and mid lanes for Genji is not as big, and I think that's a huge gap. That
if
they'll
T1
have to
don't
pass
ban
through.
Poppy though, they lose the series.
But they will.
That's what I'm saying.
They'll ban Poppy.
Who's
They
home
didn't
team
ban
this time?
Umpty's Poppy.
Who's home team this time? Who gets blue twice?
I actually don't remember who had it last time.
I think it was Genji.
I'm gonna look it up.
I mean, back then, I think we hadn't
think you're right,
discovered
though.
that Silas was monster busted,
Yeah,
so Red
that's
Side
why.
still was relevant.
That's why this time I think for the best of three it could matter a lot more, because you have to ban Zeri,
Yeah.
you have to ban Poppy if you're red for T1. So,
It
could be.
draft will be really interesting. I'm really.
Do they have to ban Silas as well? It's
And do they want to ban Lucian against
against Ruler?
But
Seems
T1,
like a good
They don't
idea.
really
will have
have
side
to.
selection.
Yeah, so
T1 will
is
have
down
side
team.
selection.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So with blue side, I think that goes much further in T1's favor, as of course.
You can ban Lucian then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like before we started recording this episode, I was like scared to talk about this because I really wasn't sure. But the more we've talked about it, I'm like now like extremely confident. Like I'm ready to predict T1. Like the more we've talked about it, I've like sold myself. Like I think they will win it. I almost want to say I think they win 2-0.
And then inevitably they don't win. And
Yeah, actually,
we're
I mean,
all idiots again, and everything's perfect.
Just play the Curb Your Enthusiasm music.
Yeah.
I think that T1's going to win as well, and therefore I'm predicting Genji.
Yeah, I mean, counterpoint, like with the bottom side of the map being stronger and with it technically mattering more in this meta, maybe Genji are able to just push it over the line twice. Maybe Ruler can just carry.
Yeah, I mean,
I am a little
they're
bit
good
worried,
enough.
though, that now we're just getting Aphelios Jinx every single game, so I think that should favor T1, actually, because it means that you don't get to abuse bottom lane matchups as much as Ruler and Lehens were doing earlier on in the split.
Yeah, Callista's just gone. Like she's just not allowed to be played. She's on the ban list now. So like that was the main champion that was like, okay, we have to 3v3 now. There's a Callista in the game or there's a Lucian in the game. Both those champions are not really being played anymore because they're always banned. So
Yeah, I actually also think that with the rise of Draven, Callista and Lucian both have lost a lot of power in draft because if you don't ban Draven, like once Draven gets banned, it becomes a little bit different again. But there's a lot of interesting tactical games to be played. But like, if you ban Draven late and they don't ban the and they don't ban the Callista and the Lucian, then you can maybe get one of those. Because I still think that those picks are extremely strong.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it is a little bit dangerous to let things hinge. Anyway, I do want to have one final conversation, gentlemen, because we have been talking for quite some time. But I think that what we do need to address is some of the sadder sides of things. There has been a slight uptick for Nongshim as of yesterday, but our bottom three teams, Humble Life Esports, Fred Brion, and Nongshim, have really sort of cataclysmically fallen down in the last... in this season, and I don't necessarily know what's massively gone wrong. I think outside of what happened to Nongshim, which was never being able to recover after the COVID situation and also just struggling with coordination the whole time. But it does feel like our top 7 teams are so much stronger than our bottom 3.
What I think happens is that, and Nongshim is a little bit of a separate story, but if you, like Fred Brion, I had a very strong inkling that they were overperforming in the previous split because they had the same roster as last year. So in spring, you're just going to have a head start. And like, they kind of rode that head start very nicely. They had caught momentum at a couple of crucial moments at the end of the split to make playoffs. But for both Hanwha and Bro, I think that a lot of rosters that on paper should be stronger might just take longer to get to a point where they actually are stronger. But once they are, they're not losing anymore, right? Like I think as you get deeper and deeper into the year, the individual quality of players matters. Both matters more as in like what peak can you reach. And I think if you look at the other teams, Kwangno is kind of in a weird space of their own, but Live Sandbox, especially with Prince, is a really good example of they finally found their groove. And then individually, the players, I think, were always better, which is why in the past, some of us foolishly, prematurely got excited
Some
about
of
Live
us.
Sandbox. And now it actually pays off, right? Like, and I think you see that kind of across the board. KT is another really good example where this roster in spring just looked kind of lost, and then ever since Viklaus joined, it's kind of clicked. They found their identity. They're not suddenly going to like start winning the LCK, but
Weirdly, they actually clicked before that. Remember, Aria got like 3 POGs. Like they were already on the upswing.
It was already better this split, but I do think that again, like it started at the end of last split when he came in.
Yeah, a lot of what it was for KT was getting that environment working
Yeah.
out, and maybe that's what's going wrong for some of these bottom teams.
For me, like there's like even a microcosm within the bottom 3 teams that I want to discuss, and I think for Hanwha and for Fredit Brion, it's an overall like the roster has kind of a like middle ground for each player. It's not like you look at Hanwha and you look at Fredit Brion and you go, this one player is holding the team back. Not really the case. In fact, the higher you go up the standings, like the same discussion we were just having in our Worlds conversation is like, ooh, is Pioshik holding the team back? Like, is Vikkel holding the team back? Like, what's going on with Dove? But I think for both Hanwha and for Fredit Brion, because they're all kind of on the same level as each other overall, like you can say some players are stronger than others, etc. I think they're kind of like growing together and evolving together. And I think that is the reason why Nongshim has looked in the end of times actually even worse than the other two, is because they had a clear role problem. Now they have 3 players that are kind of rotating between. Peter has, of course, been sent down, but like who knows, he might come back.
No.
And like I think when you have like one specific point on a team where like literally otherwise you have 4 amazing players, it is extremely frustrating. And I think that as a result, like Nongshim has this one weak point that they're trying to fix and play around, and they just couldn't solve it. And so as a result, like everybody's just kind of pissed, like everybody's annoyed, like everybody's just burnt out, like we've done everything, we got a 3rd player in here, we still couldn't fix it. And like I think if this was a Western team, to be totally honest, like there would be like beef and on Twitter, and like we'd hear all sorts of stories about what's going on with this team. This is just my personal opinion. Like I don't actually know. Maybe the players are totally cool and there's like no internal issues, but I have to expect that there are big internal issues going on in Nongshim just based on how they're playing, how they interact with each other, like how the games look, how poor their coordination is despite having now almost 2 full seasons to build that synergy. And I do think that, you know, because this is the LCK and we do kind of keep things under wraps, we'll probably never really know what's going on internally. So I may be right, I may be wrong, but we'll never know. But I think that that's like the difference between the tiers of how these teams are like growing. Because Nongshim, like they still are on paper like arguably better than both Hanwha and Fredit Brion with the caliber of players they have, but it doesn't feel like they're in a separate tier because the coordination is just so poor. You forget how good these players are. You forget how good Kana is. You forget how good BDD is. You forget how good Ghost is, and even Dread, because you're like, man, they just can't do it. Like this roster has failed. Like it just won't happen. And I think that it's kind of proved, like Genji has proved, like if you have to have the 5th piece, you have to have all 5 pieces if you're going to build a super team like this, because Genji's super team was like just 1 piece bigger than Nongshim's in terms of all the parts they put together. And yet look at where they are in the standings and look at where Nongshim is. I think you have to have the full package if you're going to build a team like this, because just having 1 support player, or 3 in this case, that aren't up to the rest of the team standards means you just totally collapse. So I think that's kind of what I saw.
I think that there's like, because like, yeah, you're talking about it like...
Did you say that again?
Wow, Siri, the biggest like Nongshim apologist ever.
Yeah, seriously.
How dare you talk about my team like that?
That is just ridiculous. She's like actually just finished her Shin Ramyun. She's like, this was delicious. You please apologize.
That was actually really hilarious.
No, but like, so we've actually seen lots of super teams like this built in the past, right? I think KT's one
Fatality.
kind of worked. I think T1's super team in 2019 didn't work. There's too many chefs in the kitchen there. Yes, they still made top 4, right? It's not like the Nongshim catastrophe that we saw here. But super teams have worked and they haven't. But the thing that's the biggest is that it was a buy round. It was a buy round for Nongshim, and they went completely boom. Like, you're looking at the other 2 teams that they're next to, it's eco. We are going pistols, and that's it. Like, Hanwha Life Esports are like saving so much this
Bro,
year.
they're buying my
it's
boy
obscene.
Chonny. He's cheap, dude.
Yeah, they're like, Samdi's too
He gets it
expensive,
done.
actually. Like, let's move him away. You know, like that's sort of where
I
they're
really
at.
like this. I really like this analogy. It's so true.
But I mean, that's what it is. But like, what happened was, like, they're going pistol round, but they're going even with like the Orb team over here that are like have all of the biggest guns that they could possibly buy.
They got a thrifty.
Yeah, but they did not understand. Yeah, they
Thrifty
definitely
round.
they got they definitely did get a
not even
thrifty.
playing. They're just like gardening together, and they're playing Stardew Valley with the boys, just making sure that they have a good time.
Growing
They're
a
waiting
family.
for that new the Square Enix farming simulator thing, and they're getting ready for it.
But
They're
like,
very
how
excited.
as Kana, like with the places he's been and like the peaks he's reached, as Dread, who was like,
But all of these players have caveats.
Yeah,
That's the thing that I find
exactly.
really, really interesting about Nongshim. Like, Kana, weak champion pool, often would overextend, needed a lot of help in order to look good on
Yeah.
T1. That was always
I thought
the
he
case.
was the weakest player
Had a
on
lot
T1
of high
by
highs.
far for a long time.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think like you and I were like calling for Zeus like ever since his debut. We're like bench Kana.
How could you do Mal like that?
Excuse you.
and you as well. But I feel like we
And you
Started
as
I'll
well.
be honest,
Didn't
like
we
I was
start
kind
it?
of like,
I thought
I'm
we
not
started
sure.
it.
Like I trust Kana a little bit more than you guys.
yeah.
No, but and BDD's champion pool still
BDD's
a really
champion
big
pool, but
problem.
also BDD always needing somebody else to take charge. Ghost isn't a carry. Never has been, never will be.
No.
He will always be Ghost. He needs to have solo lanes that are not only like going in, but also maybe a bit crazy. You know? And that's what, you know,
He
Nogri and
was next
Showmaker
to
were very good
Beryl.
at. And he was next to Beryl, who
so
was
many
definitely being crazy.
Games. And now he's like, well, I gotta have an opinion on what we're doing now. Like,
Yeah. And like,
That's the thing
remember,
with all of
do
these
that?
players,
No, I can't
right?
do
Yeah,
that.
they need
But I
someone
mean-
to lead them.
But Effort also needed Prince to lead him to make that bottom lane look good. Like, Effort's
As we
also
now
like a
found out.
role player who doesn't make decisions. He never has. Like, even
Yeah.
when he was on T1, he was never the one that was actually making the calls. And even then, it felt like Mata was like micromanaging him from behind the scenes anyway. So he had a lot of help, and and Dread has always been an extraordinarily emotional player that played well in the early game, but then required somebody else to really push him over the line, but also needed motivation from outside. We've seen this already, bench for health reasons and things like this.
Yeah.
Like, this split has really, really gotten to him. And I looked at this team at the beginning and I was like, oh man, it all works. Carry style top laner, early aggressive jungler to get Canna ahead. BDD can then feed off that aggression,
Low
and they have a
resource
role
bot
player
lane,
on
yeah.
the bottom side. But then if you put it into the context of where these players all have been, it just doesn't quite get to a point that's good. And it doesn't mesh. And now they're like throwing Snowflower in there saying, can you help us like you helped 2019 KT? And
Hey.
Snowflower's like, you remember what happened, right?
What about 2020 Supermassive, my guy?
Oh, well, that's true. That's true.
It's really rough, and I could see, especially with now we talk about all of these players, a alternative universe where they don't get COVID, they find some momentum, and they just never they'll probably never be great, but like they wouldn't be full mental boom because now the team just has zero confidence, and like this roster is gonna get blown.
I mean, this is for some of these players potentially, and in the past,
Yeah.
seasons like this have been career-ending. Like,
Yeah.
will BDD make it back on a team like Damwon, Genji, or T1? Like, probably not after this season, right? So, like,
Yeah.
once you get to that point, it's like, when you were losing these games and you're frustrated, you have all the pressure of, like, oh, we're not even going to make playoffs, but then you're like, what if I just don't get on a team after this? Like, what if this is my future? Like, all of this stuff gets in your head, and I think that's the point I'm getting at, just to bring it back for, like, 1 second, is, like, for Hano Life and for Frederick Brian, like, it's the eco round, like you said, but none of these players are like, I was on the edge of greatness, and now, like, I'm here. It's like, oh, I'm on the edge of actually being, like, a middling player, and, like, let's see how far we can go. Whereas Kana is, like, on T1 top laner. Dread was the ace of Afrika. That's what he called himself. Like, to drop all the way down this far is, like, there's so much in your mind, in the back of your mind, while you're trying to also focus on the game.
I mean, I think, like, BDD probably has had a bigger fall from grace than
Agreed.
Dade did. I actually think that it's almost it's similar. Like, Masters 3 was not a very good team in the LPL when Dade sort of left. He picked up the Dade award at Worlds and then then left and fell into obscurity in the LPL. BDD had an amazing Worlds, played out of his mind. I think he was the best mid laner that we sent. like, which is a pretty outrageous thing to say considering, you know, who he was alongside. But I still believe that that was true. Outside of maybe, you know, Showmaker performing relatively well and things like, and Faker as well having a great tournament. But I still think that BDD individually was probably our best mid lane representative.
Sure.
But like,
I mean, they won or died by him in that
they
semifinal.
did.
Yeah.
But then like seeing him come back and like looking at him now, over that period of time, like that's a huge change.
Yeah, I think summer purely BDD has looked better in summer, but it also has not mattered at all. I think spring for him is such a hard season to rate because of the whole COVID brain fog thing. But even now, like, I agree with Wolf. Like, especially seeing what we have waiting in challengers, because there are some players that truly look incredible, and a lot of them are mid laners, right? So you have Fisher, you have Poolbay, you have Bulldog, and seeing BDD like this year, if you have the chance to either pick up him for what I assume will still be a pretty high price, or you pick up like maybe the next big thing, I think it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes it really, really hard.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Some of these players, like on Nongsha, might be in the LCS next year.
I was
Like,
about to say that.
Like, I'm not
I was
kidding.
about to say
Oh my
that, actually. I'm
God.
like, what do you guys feel about BDD on FlyQuest?
I mean, I
Okay,
don't know.
well, let's
like,
not send him down to FlyQuest just yet.
Yeah, because if we look individually for Hanwha and for Bro, right, I think Karset has a pretty abhorrent split, but I'd still could see him thrive if he has a good team, a good environment, and like gets guided towards being a more consistent player. I think Delight still remains one of the players where I'm like, what if he's ever put on like a good team with a good system?
Morgan, you know, we saw what he could do when he was on Hanwha with some stronger
Umti.
players. Well,
Well, I mean, I'm going for players that have
Yeah,
not
man,
been
he's
around
good.
for as long. But yeah.
I think like to close on all this is like the three teams we're talking about here, like the not top 7 teams in the LCK, the bottom 3, to put it in a more like contextually appropriate way. There's a reason why the conversation that we just had was completely dominated by Notion, because they have just been the one they failed. Like, I don't know, and like the fact that we actually had this entire conversation, like, and we're all feeling like a little bit down about it. Like, imagine being Dread or Kana or Ghost, right? Like, that's kind of like my final thoughts on this.
It always hurts seeing the
Yeah.
player cams.
Yeah, that's how that's
Pain.
sort of how it goes. The unfortunate thing is here in the LCK, there always has to be winners and losers, right? Every single day. Sometimes some teams win more than other teams, and that is generally how it also goes.
Viper and Lahant were 10th on Hanwha, and then Viper won Worlds last year, so it's possible.
Wow, wouldn't that be so adorable? Like Viper, it'd be only Tarzan that hasn't won Worlds if Gen G manages to win Worlds.
Yeah.
So
Of,
you're
like,
saying Henna
I
is
wanna
gonna
get,
win
like,
Worlds
the-
next year? Like.
No. I just want somehow for Griffin to win
Not funny,
Worlds.
Wolf.
we need the original Griffin to somehow win Worlds. That's what we need. But Fred at Brian would need to do it because I guess Sword needs to get up there. So like, I don't know how Tarzan's going to get there because I haven't been watching enough LPL. They share a time slot with us.
not-
It makes it a little bit difficult, but it's not going super well over there.
From what I've heard, LNG is not great, no.
And RNG will be good by the end of the
RNG,
season.
EDG are probably going to be.
Yeah.
That's like, I think, the main ones, if I
All
remember
right.
correctly.
Well, so that means that Tarzan's got a little bit of work to do, but that means that there is room for potentially Gen G to get there, but we'll just have to see. I think this episode has gone on for like an extraordinarily long time. We did have other things that we were going to talk about, but we'll save that for the next episode because we are back to a bi-weekly or a
Yay.
fortnightly schedule. We will be seeing you in a couple of weeks' time where we get to discuss things like 12-14, which is going to be a big patch. We haven't spoken about 12-13 that much. You know, there's Fiddlesticks, Karthus, Civ got reworked.
Broken. The
And
first team to pick up
Talia
Fiddlesticks
is still
is
going to be
gonna win a
back.
lot of
Corky
games.
die.
Woo! And Corky's dead, and that's
Yay.
we just need to remove Stopwatch, and Valdes will have a very restful night's sleep. That is not happening just yet. But
Not
thank you
yet.
so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen, and we will see you in a couple of weeks' time for the next episode of the Pog State. And also, all 4 of us will probably see you in a couple of minutes' time if you're watching this live, because the LCK will be going live for Wednesday's games. Enjoy.